Hi, everyone. Welcome to ChiroSphere, where we talk about all things chiropractic and some things not so chiropractic. I'm Kristi Hudson, your guest host, filling in for Dr. Ray Foxworth. I'm also the Director of Business Relations for Chiro Health USA, the network that works for chiropractic. Today's guest brings together the worlds of athletic grit, clinical excellence, and cutting edge brain science. Dr. Henry Zaremba is a board certified chiropractic neurologist with over 100 hours of postdoctoral study in the field, a former collegiate ice hockey player at UNC Chapel Hill. His own experience with concussion sparked a lifelong passion for understanding and healing the brain. Now part of the innovative team at Apex Brain Centers, he is helping to change lives through progressive care for nervous system disorders ranging from post-concussion syndrome and brain injury to learning about behavioral challenges, substance use disorders, and neurodegenerative conditions. Whether you're a provider, a patient, or just brain curious like this girl, this episode will challenge the way you think about healing and human potential. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Kristi. We got the audio working, and that's always the fun part of doing a podcast is making sure that we got the technical stuff lined up, and I think we've got it. So I'm not going to
You
break
know,
the keyboard.
well, yeah, exactly. I was going to say, I'm a huge fan of technology, especially when it works.
That's the caveat.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with your origin story and let our audience get to know you a little bit. So, why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about your experience as a college athlete and your own concussion that led you to the field of chiropractic neurology?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Christy. So, I was always interested in chiropractic. I was one of those kids that was always in the waiting room. Dr. John Smith in Raleigh, North Carolina. He was just one of the like OGs, as we say, of chiropractic in that area. And I remember being in his office a lot. So chiropractic was always just like a fairly regular thing. I'd get adjusted while I was playing hockey and things like that growing up. Um, I played at UNC Chapel Hill, I was a club athlete, which is, a different breed than the NCAA guys. We just had there was a bit more of a work hard, play hard mentality, I guess you could say. But so it was my senior year, we were playing UNC Charlotte, and I still don't remember the play, but I got hit against the boards. Made it back to the bench somehow and, pretty much told my coach, like, I need a breather at least, and I think they were like, yeah, he's not good. We need to pull him out of the game. I had been used to growing up playing hockey. I've been playing at that point, I've been playing for like 15, 16 years. Obviously at some point over that time I had hit my head, I had more hits. Some hits were worse than others. I was never the biggest guy on the ice, so I spent a lot of my career trying to avoid getting hit. But when I got caught, I really got caught. And I was used to every now and then, I'd have a hit where I'd have like a headache or, maybe some other symptoms that were a little bit more than just feeling sore. But, this concussion my senior year of playing in college really affected me on a deeper level. I had to pull out of classes. It was really difficult for me to like really engage with my brain in terms of things like reading and schoolwork. Reading schoolwork stuff. I ended up doing some reading on, Sports Illustrated and, so sports has always been one of my things. And I ended up reading an article on the Players Tribune, which is an online publication that's kind of by athletes. So basically, whereas Sports Illustrated is a bunch of journalists that are writing about what's going on, the Players Tribune is all self-submitted articles by the athletes themselves. So I was reading articles by other hockey players, football players, professional fighters that had suffered concussions. And I kind of saw some of myself in a lot of what they were writing about. I think the college lifestyle that I was living at the time probably wasn't conducive to me doing very well with that concussion. But, even just from like a mental health perspective and, it definitely affected me there was, having a little bit more depression and anxiety than I was used to typically. And then, the self-medication kind of came along with that. So it really was this experience that kind of opened my eyes to, learning more about how the brain just really dictates everything about your reality, and it's something that needs to be taken care of. And two, just for time, just to kind of frame it, this was not too long after the Will Smith movie came out called Concussion, where I think it was called Concussion, but he basically portrayed the Nigerian doctor that was convincing the NFL that, repetitive head trauma is actually bad for your brain. Go figure. But yeah, it was around the time that CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, was kind of coming onto the public discourse. People were learning more about it, and the brain was just something that people were wanting to learn more about at that time. And it kind of set me on this career path because I came across learning about Sidney Crosby and his concussion, and him working with Dr. Ted Carrick, who many people credit as being the father of chiropractic neurology, or founder, whatever term you want to use. But for me, that was pretty eye opening. And the fact that Sidney Crosby, he played for the Pittsburgh Penguins, and the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center is kind of held as one of the best institutions out there, especially for acute concussion and head injury in terms of research, and then their hospital as well. And they weren't able to get Sid back on the ice, but then Dr. Carrick was. So I kind of was already chiropractic was in my mind as a possibility career wise, but that just like really solidified it. So I went to school kind of knowing that I wanted to do this chiropractic neurology route, all because of that experience, that one concussion, and taking some time off classes and just reading some articles online.
Oh, I love that. It's amazing how our life experiences lead us down like a completely different path than maybe we even had envisioned for ourselves. It's like, chiropractic sounds good, but then this head injury and everything, it's like, well, now I can take chiropractic with a passion for helping other people through my experiences to recover from that. So I think that's a really incredible thing. It's one of the things I love most and I find so fascinating about chiropractic is that the general population thinks of chiropractic as for low back pain, headaches, things like that. And then working in this field for 15 years and you realize there's so much more to it. There's the chiropractic neurology and functional med and pediatrics and there are so many different ways that chiropractic helps with that whole body health and healing. So I think it's incredible that, you know, you took chiropractic and then you found this passion for brain injury and were able to find this career path that brought both of those together. You have 500 hours of postdoctoral studies, which is just incredible. So, what drives your passion for learning and staying at the forefront of brain science?
Well, it's one of those things where I guess, you get a little taste and then you start to get addicted because, you learn some of the surface level of, the neuroanatomy, and then some of the basics of how the pathways work. And then starting to kind of couple that with some of the treatment modalities, and even just coupling it with the philosophy of chiropractic. Because I was a student when I first started, in chiropractic school, we had some of those philosophy classes early on. I hated it. Like, to be honest, I know this is a chiropractic podcast, but, in those philosophy courses, and our professor was this super interesting dude. He was a Vietnam veteran, and, just one of the most stout, defenders, I guess you could say, or advocates for just the pure principles of chiropractic that's out there, Dr. Shreve at Palmer, Florida. But I remember it got to a point where I just started raising my hand in class and like questioning him on everything, because it would be like, oh, well, these are, innate intelligence, mental impulses going through the body. And I remember being pretty scientifically minded, and just kind of thinking, well, how is this medical school? Like, what are we talking about here? But what's funny is I think that that questioning was like exactly what it's meant to do, because it got me thinking more about, what really is the framework for how to approach a patient. And then, another person that I give a lot of credit to that for is Dr. Donald Dishman, who was another professor at Palmer, Florida when I started there. And it was one of those things where, he'll probably laugh at this, but he would go on these tangents. I remember there was one specific tangent in our neuroanatomy class where he was talking about carpal tunnel. And I still have the notes, I think. I just was like writing down everything he said because I found it to be incredibly fascinating, just the way he was talking about this, wrist neuropathy and expanding upon it to talk about like metabolic health and talk about, conservative approaches and all sorts of other research, sedentary lifestyles. It was the type of thing where I was like, wow, this is amazing. And I remember looking around in class, and I think everyone else was kind of checked out because they were like, yeah, this is way beyond the scope of what's going to be on the test. So, I think I found that thing that just really clicked, in terms of I found it to be super interesting. And, you get the itch, and then it becomes the type of thing where you just want to dig deeper. One of the things about learning from Dr. Dishman was I actually got to start taking some of the chiropractic diplomate classes in neurology, before I ever actually got credit for them because he would record them on campus. And I kind of, buddied up to him a little bit and wanted to follow him around everywhere. So there was actually a couple of classes that I attended without actually registering just because he was like, yeah, whatever, if you want to sit in the back, you'll have to eventually, if you wanted the diplomate, you're going to need to pay for the hours eventually. But yeah, so I was lucky enough to be one of the earlier generations to be able to start the diplomate classes actually while I was a student too. And two, I remember taking the electrodiagnosis classes with him, which is looking at things like neuroconduction velocity, nerve conduction velocity, needle EMG. And then, that was kind of a full circle moment for, that day in quarter 1 when I was learning about carpal tunnel from him. And, here we were, doing the electrophysiological testing for it. So, and two, kind of where I'm at now, having, you know, 8-ish years of clinical experience under my belt at this point, it just becomes the kind of thing where when you're learning things that is going to help people and you kind of see that impact, that just becomes, a further more of a driver, to just kind of dig deeper and learn everything you can, because the patients are doing everything they can, so they deserve, my efforts towards that as well.
I love that. So, with your work right now at Apex Brain Centers, you're working with some pretty complex cases like TBI, post concussion syndrome, and even substance abuse, which I found so very interesting. So, how do you approach these differently than conventional chiropractic care?
Sure. So, we definitely make sure that we always incorporate more traditional chiropractic care methods, into what we're doing with people just as a start. Because, we talk to people, for example, with traumatic brain injury, you have this kind of trifecta of your visual inputs, your proprioception, which is a big part of your brain body connection, and your vestibular system. And all three of those senses need to work together to just keep us up on 2 feet. And when the spine isn't working correctly, your proprioception isn't going to work correctly, your vestibular system isn't going to work correctly, and then you're going to have challenges with your visual integration of all of those senses. So, it's definitely a big part of what we do here at Apex. But we also include a lot of other modalities that can help to facilitate the brain to be able to heal. So some of the things we use are things like hyperbaric therapy, low level laser therapy, specific rehabilitation exercises, whether it's, visual therapy exercises like oculomotor training and eye movement training, vestibular training and balance training. We'll do a lot of what we call motor cognitive dual tasking, which is a phenomenon in the literature where if you're kind of using the mind and exercising the body at the same time, it tends to create this synergistic effect where you get better activation of the brain, and better improvement in those cognitive outcomes too. I like to, I'm stealing this from Dr. Trayford, but, I tell patients all the time, we have a lot of tools in the toolbox, but it's just about understanding what each specific patient needs. And through, both our research and clinical experience, just trying to do everything we can to help connect people with solutions, that are tailored to their specific case. Because when you've seen a TBI, especially, or any sort of brain injury, you've seen exactly one brain injury. No two are exactly alike. So having kind of a wide variety of tools and the technology goes a long way, but also knowing how and when to apply them is a really important part of it too.
No, absolutely. What do you think are some common misconceptions you hear when it comes to brain injury and healing the nervous system?
That's a really good question because there's a lot of them out there. And especially in like the social media world that we all live in now, because it's not just in our phones. It like that stuff gets in our head and it interferes with our normal thought processes and our behaviors. But one of the biggest misconceptions about any sort of brain injury out there, whether it's a traumatic brain injury or acquired brain injury like a stroke, and I have patient coming in here telling me this. Someone told me this yesterday as I was doing their intake evaluation. Is that at a certain point you're just as good as you're going to get. Especially with stroke, this is something that people hear all the time, and neurologists or medical neurologists are still regularly telling people. Is that after about two, you want to do as much rehab as you can in the first 2 years. After about 2 years, those pathways just kind of become set or whatever they want to, however they justify saying it. And it's just, don't expect any improvements after 2 years. That's just kind of how you're going to be. You need to get used to it, kind of get your affairs in order. And we've proved that wrong time and time again. Whether you've had a brain injury or you haven't had a brain injury, your brain is always trying to remodel and adapt to be able to do better at whatever you did over the past 24 hours or the past period of time. So that's why things like routine chiropractic care I think are so important for the general public. But that whole idea of like there's like just a cap on, well, it's been 2 years, so you're out of time, your rehab period is over and there's no way you're going to get any better. That's one of the biggest ones that I hear. And then two, the other one that I think is just as damaging, because that limiting belief plays a big role in people's outcomes. If people think something's going to help, their intention, their sense of is something feasible or not, is going to play a role on whether or not that change is actually going to happen. But another one that I think is very damaging is that whether it's a primary care provider or whoever ends up seeing this person after a head injury in the acute situation, basically just telling them to go home and rest, and especially if they're dealing with things like light and sound sensitivity, other sensory overdrive, they're likely going to just retreat into a dark room, and just kind of hope that, well, I just need to give myself time to heal and then I'll kind of reintegrate into the world. But basically, what you're doing is you're kind of teaching your brain that this is the only way I'm going to feel good is if I'm just staying in a dark room. We know now through research through the University of Buffalo as some of the more groundbreaking papers in terms of concussion recovery and acute stages. The Buffalo bike test, the Buffalo treadmill test. We know now pretty definitively that you want to do some light cardiac activity, cardiovascular exercise, at about 80% of the heart rate that threshold that gives you symptoms, typically is what we want people to be doing. So, and then there's a lot that you can do from a nutrition standpoint, and even just focusing on things like breathing exercises to just make sure you're oxygenating the brain, controlling fight or flight responses. So there's definitely a lot that can be done. And it's not just not going to help you to go into a dark room and just kind of retreat from the world after a concussion or any sort of head injury. But it actually can be very damaging, I think, for people's long-term prognosis. So it's almost like medical malpractice that this is still something that people are being told out there because it's having real effects. It's affecting people's ability to heal. They're listening to medical advice from people who are in positions to be able to help people, but they're giving them outdated advice and it's damaging.
That's incredible. Um, the power of social media and all of the misinformation that we all take, or not we, but so many people take as fact. My son, when he was in high school and TikTok was coming out, and there were so many chiropractic TikToks, and he would send them to me, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, this is not chiropractic." I'm so embarrassed because people would come up to him and go, "This is what you're going to do for a living?" And he's like, "No, I'm not going to do that." And they're like, "But this is chiropractic." And he was like, "No, you need to go to a chiropractor because this is not chiropractic." So I love that that is a real thing, that there is a whole generation of people where, I'm a little bit, well, I'm a lot older than you. We still had encyclopedias, like the book of encyclopedias in our house, and not computers until I was in college. Um, And then as in my 20s, we had Google. Google was everything. Like Google knows all. Today, people have ChatGPT and TikTok.
Right. Right.
It's a scary, scary thought. Well, anyway, hang tight, everybody. We're going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsors, and then we're going to jump back in with Dr. Henry. Welcome back to the podcast with Dr. Henry. So, we have really done some deep dives on some misconceptions, some different ways that you're treating patients with brain injuries in comparison to, your typical chiropractic patient. So, I want to talk to you a little bit about um, how are you balancing the demands of cutting edge clinical work as you really talked about research from tons of different sources? And as we know, like research is published on a pretty regular basis.
Mhm.
Not so much in chiropractic, but, I imagine when it comes to brain injury, and especially with the professional sport, especially soccer, football being two of them, um, that brain injury and concussion is a huge concern for professional athletes and those organizations. So, how are you balancing the demands of all of this cutting edge clinical work, all of this research that comes out, and then dealing with what is the very human side of patient care? Because I think that a lot of people, when they think of people who are so into research, like yourself, who get really excited about these things. All of my good friends, Heidi Havoc, and all of them, like Katie Pullman, like they nerd out on some research. Like they get real excited about the research. But the other aspect of that is while you're working on this clinical research is that you are dealing with human beings who are going through a very traumatic experience. So how do you balance?
Sure, that's a really good question. And even just to go back to social media for a second, I think there's almost like the way that like media in general functions now is that it has to kind of create these two sides in opposition, and that kind of is going to drive interest because people are like, oh, there's this conflict. It's like there's the traditional medical establishment, and then there are people that are trying to engage in these progressive approaches. And just like in politics, there's the two sides of the fence. You got to figure out which side you're on. But in my real world experience, it's mostly that hasn't been the case. We regularly get referrals from the big hospital system here. I actually did a lunch and learn at it's called Mission Hospital is the big hospital here in Asheville. I recently did a lunch and learn with their outpatient neurology center, which was I did it over computer like this because I wasn't able to pull away in the middle of the day. But it's one of those things where kind of people perceive that kind of dichotomy that's not always there. But I think that in terms of balancing the clinical side of things and then the research side of things, at the end of the day, I'm a clinician. I'm all about whatever is going to help my patients to get better. And while the research goes a long way towards informing that, white papers and peer-reviewed literature is only one side of the coin. We learned about in school that evidence-based practice is based on scientific research, but also patient experience and doctor experience, or patient preferences, maybe is a better way to put that, and the doctor's clinical experience. Those three things play a huge role in kind of keeping evidence-based practice afloat. So while I, I feel lucky to have learned from Dr. Dishman, shout out to him again, because I feel like I've from him just gained such a strong understanding of the neuroanatomy and neurophysiology that then kind of creates a framework to understand research as it comes out, but also understand things that I'm seeing in the clinic in real time, to be able to react to it appropriately, and hopefully apply interventions in the right way to be able to maximize outcomes. But at the end of the day, we're here at Apex, myself, Dr. Trayford, we're clinicians through and through. So while having a really strong understanding of the literature and of the scientific research is hugely important, we are going to do whatever we can. Our job as clinicians is to maximize the utility of that scientific information, to be able to be applied to maximize its benefit for people. So if you're just looking to basically be a robot and just do exactly what's in a research article, you're probably not going to get the same outcomes because you know laboratory conditions don't really exist in real life, So
Oh,
it's obviously super valuable to have these randomized quadruple blind controlled studies. That's just not the way that real clinical practice works. So, and it's again super important. You need to have good understanding of that, in my opinion, to be in functional neurology. But our job is to kind of take that data or that information and really I don't know if stretching it is the right word, but just, use it in the way where it's maximally benefiting people. That's ultimately what our goal is. So I think kind of keeping that in mind is really helpful, and just keeping it patient focused. At our center, we primarily are doing more immersive brain treatment, where people are in the office for 4 to 5 hours a day for 2 to 3 weeks sequentially. And some of that's because a lot of people travel to work with us. We have people that'll fly in from all over and stay in the area. But we spend a lot of time with people, so you get to know them, get to know their families, their hopes, their goals for treatment. So, at the end of the day, we do what we can to help them the best we can. But a good, strong understanding rooted in the research is an important part of being able to do that. So it's a balance for sure.
I love that. And I do love how you pointed out, there are no, I mean, real life does not have clinical conditions. And you can have two patients the same age, same sex, same injury, but they're going to they're going to go through or react to treatment. Their bodies are going to react to treatment differently, right? Because there's so many other things, their lifestyle choices, their health and well-being prior to the injury to currently, their environmental factors. There's so many things that affect a patient's reactions to a treatment. So I always tell people, I was like, you can't treat the same thing the same way for every single person because every single person is different. So I love that you talk about that. So do you have like one particular like patient story or case that really sticks with you that really enforces your why, like why you do this?
Sure. Well, actually, even just going back to when I first started, I actually didn't even have my neurology diplomate yet because I was finishing up my hours, but I kind of knew that was what I wanted to do. And I was working at a functional medicine clinic in Boulder, Colorado, actually. And I pretty vividly remember it was like my first case of like a neuro person or neuro patient I was being referred to the office, to see me. And it was like, oh my God, she's coming in. This is it. It's happening. I'm actually going to be, someone's doctor for a brain case. And I go out into the waiting room, and it was she had been in a car wreck like a week earlier, I think. And she has a bag of frozen peas on her neck. She's wearing like 2 or 3 pairs of really thick, dark glasses. Like, the old men in Florida that have the like glasses that are like a house built around their face. It's like covering all sides. So she had like the darkest of dark glasses. She had the ice on. She was like kind of sitting, like you could tell she was uncomfortable. And it was just this moment of like, oh my God, do I know what I'm doing? Like, what did I sign myself up for? But, after a few visits, she started to do really, really well, and she got back to work. And it was just one of those things where we actually found out she was having what's called rebound headaches, where she was taking excessive amount over the counter medications to try to combat her headaches that were associated with the injury. And then that was actually worsening her headaches and leading to a different type of headache developing. So that was a big part of it. But we saw some big changes in her. Just right away, my first case, it was one of those things where I was like shaking in my boots, and, just kind of trusted my education and, went through with what, I felt was best at the time. And we saw some really impressive changes, so that was one that stands out. And then another patient that really stands out, and I have, permission to kind of share about his case. So I'm going to use his name, but his name's Scott. And he actually had stroke secondary to an AVM, arteriovenous malformation. He basically was just having a normal day and suddenly kind of collapsed and was taken to the hospital. They found this massive AVM. He actually had one of the largest, if not at the time, was I think the largest craniotomy ever performed in the state of North Carolina. To be able to pull that AVM out of his brain. But when he first came to our clinic here at Apex, he was literally like just sitting there falling asleep in the middle of a conversation because his brain was just that unstable from an energy standpoint, a cellular energy standpoint, that he couldn't kind of keep up with conversations. He would just be like kind of sitting there falling asleep. And it wasn't because he was, bored or anything along those lines. In fact, the more I've gotten to know him, I mean, he's more full of life and, kind of fun, random conversations than most of the people that I've met. But over years of working with him, and he's been, the type where he's gone through multiple intensive treatment programs with us, we've seen some really dramatic improvements in him to the point where he's now actually one of our patient ambassadors. So he lives in the Charlotte area, and he'll basically, through some of the people that he knows in the community, he'll basically go out of his way to go speak with people who have whether they've suffered strokes or brain injuries. He basically goes and talks to them about his experience here, and not necessarily acting as like a salesman or anything like that, but so much as helping people feel that sense of camaraderie, that there's someone else who's kind of gone through what they're going through right now, or at least some version of it. And just that there's hope that's out there. And he's sharing, our clinic. I don't think we're the only clinic out there, but I think we feel really strong in our lane, and we can do a lot to help people. And Scott's an example of that, and he basically took it upon himself to try to spread that information to other people, to connect them with us, because he felt that he was helped so much. So he's one of those ones that sticks out too, not just because we're friends and we both went to UNC Chapel Hill, so we get to talk about the Tar Heels and basketball, and now football too, with Bill Belichick being the coach, but we talk about the ripple effects. I remember BJ Palmer had that passage where he talks about the ripple effect of, you adjust one person, you improve their life, you adjust a community, and I'm probably butchering the actual quote, but, and you adjust a community, if you adjust the whole world, what are the benefits going to be there? So, Scott is kind of exemplifying that, because he's taking the positivity that from the improvements he's trying to spread it to others, to help them be aware of some of the other solutions that are out there, because unfortunately in the space that we work in, and especially traumatic and acquired brain injuries especially, we see that there's just this big gap between the scientific literature we talked about earlier that kind of shows all these promising modalities and ways that things can happen, and then what's actually implemented in most clinical practice settings, especially traditional healthcare settings. So having a patient kind of going out of his way to help bridge that gap is something that I think is really valuable and definitely stands out.
Oh, absolutely. So, for other chiropractors who are out there listening right now who want to better support patients with neurological issues, what should they start doing in terms of training or even in collaboration with other healthcare providers?
Sure. So that's definitely a good question, because I think one of the big things that diplomates do for the profession, and chiropractic neurology is one of, I think, like 15 different diplomates for chiropractic. But the first one was like radiology, back in, I think, the 70s or the 60s, like pretty early on. This was established as a way to raise clinical standards. And you know again, in social media world, there's all kinds of products that are marketed to people out there, whether they're valid or not. And there's all sorts of, take this course and learn more about, because I'm targeted by these ads that are like, take this course and learn how to help your patients and increase your sales and grow your practice and all that kind of thing. And there's these fly by night kind of programs that are just looking to kind of make a quick buck. I think my advice to chiropractors out there that are listening, if you're interested in getting into functional neurology, my advice would be, it's a deep dive. It's not the type of thing where it's like, well, I just want to do a little bit of it and then, I'll kind of go about it. And I'm sure there are people that do that and help people. But, especially with the patients that we see, it's the type of thing where this isn't like a weekend course that you take, or, a little certificate you hang on your wall. This is basically, we're all in on brain injury rehabilitation, and the cases that we see, and the functional neurology approach. I think the diversity in chiropractic, in terms of the specialties, especially, is actually a real strength. So I think for chiropractors out there listening, it's the idea is, if you're going to do this, I mean, I would go all in. You owe it to yourself and you owe it to your patients to, do it all the way. I mean, diplomate certifications aren't everything, but in my opinion, especially having done things like, speaking to some of the major hospital systems out there, we regularly get referrals from, all sorts of providers, from acupuncturists, and, in Asheville, we've got plenty of like energy healers and crystal healers and things along those lines, to the hardcore, traditional medical neurologists are referring patients to us. And I think that the diplomate and the certifications go a long way, because you're helping to bridge the gap, especially when talking to people in the traditional medical system, because the idea of, higher levels of education, postdoctorate education, board examination, clinical rotations, all those things that are necessary for a diplomate certification. That's something that they can wrap their head around. And, some of them may have their own preconceived notions about chiropractic in general, that whether they're valid or not. But I think the diplomates, especially the neurology diplomate, because of the role that we fill, that's not really filled by any other providers. I think that's really valuable. I would say it's worth going all in if you're gonna want to do this. You owe it to yourself, you owe it to your patients, and that's been, my experience is that that's been much more beneficial than trying to do any sort of surface level. Well, I want to try to do some of this. If this isn't going to be the path for you, then I would just get to know the functional neurologist that's close to you. I mean, we work with people from all over, but functional neurology is growing, and I bet most cities, most places in the U.S., you're likely going to have an office near you that you can refer to.
Love that. Okay, so let's do some just for fun questions.
All right,
All right. What is a talent that you have that most people don't know about?
talent I have most people don't know about. I can solve a Rubik's cube. I don't know if that's just the first thing. It's one of those things where you kinda learn how to do it, and it kinda takes the magic away from it. You're kinda like, "Oh, okay, it's really not that hard," but, that is kind of a random thing. Uh, I would say that might be the talent I go with.
I love that. Okay. What is the worst job you ever had?
Ooh, that's a good question. There was a period of time when, I lived in Colorado where uh, I was waiting for my license to come in, so I couldn't practice as a chiropractor yet. And I just got a job working at the grocery store, kind of stocking produce. But it's not like it was the worst thing in the world. I mean, it was all right, but it definitely wasn't what I wanted to do. And at the time, my now wife, we were boyfriend and girlfriend at the time, but we moved out to Colorado together, and she actually got her license right away. So I was like watching her go through kind of starting her career, and she's a chiropractic internist and was working at a pretty high level clinic out there. And it was kind of one of those things where I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go clock into my job at the grocery store, and eventually I guess I'll get to be a doctor. So that was definitely a time, especially because one time I had to get into the compost bin and help to pull out those little metal twist ties that go around like celery and things like that. Because anyways, that's kind of a long story, but yeah, that job, for a number of reasons, was probably the worst job I ever had. But yeah,
You had me at digging in the compost bin.
yeah, yeah, that was not fun. I remember going out there with, it was our assistant manager and me who were there at the time, and I was like, "All right, man, good luck." And he was like, "Oh no, you're getting in here with me." So yeah, that was not fun. I went home stinky that day.
No doubt you did. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. And thank you all for listening to the ChiroSphere podcast. Please subscribe and share the podcast with your friends, and let us know who you would like to hear from in the future and what topics you'd like us to cover. And we'll do our best to deliver. If you're offering discounts of any kind in your office, you need to make sure you are not breaking state and federal rules and regulations on dual fee schedules, inducements, anti kickback, and more, which can lead to serious fines and penalties. We can help eliminate these concerns by using our profitable discount strategy, which ensures that any discounts you offer are 100% compliant. But most importantly, it makes care affordable for your patients while keeping your practice profitable. It all starts with a no cost, no obligation phone call to find out if we can help you, like thousands of other doctors nationwide. Over the past 17 years, over 7,000 chiropractors have helped over 4.3 million patient families get the care they need at a cost they can afford using Health USA. You want to increase your revenue and retention and practice with more peace of mind? Give us a call at 888 719 9990 or visit our website at chusa.com and find out why Chiro Health USA is the network that works for chiropractic and you. Go make it a great day.